Hello, everybody. So, in the wise words of Taylor Swift, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So, let's go ahead and begin our study session today, where we will be focusing on Sigmund Freud's theory of psychoanalytic. We're going to go through all of it, so it's going to be a really long video. Pull up some popcorn, get some study notes out. And let's go ahead and begin. So let me move myself over here. Let me get my little laser pointer. And let's go ahead and start with his topographical model of what our mind looks like. So oftentimes when we talk about Freud, you'll see this model representing the mind. So this model, the way that it works is he says we have different parts of our personality that we share with the world and that we can easily access or we might not be able to easily access. One of the first things to know about Sigmund Freud is that he believed in your unconscious mind. So when you hear the term unconscious mind, automatically think of Freud. Other terms that you will often associate with him are your id, ego, and superego. So let's go ahead and begin with what are your levels of awareness and the personality structure that goes with it. So starting with our conscious mind. This is a mind that you currently have and you know really well and you can easily access. Then you have your preconscious. Now in this one, it might not be there right away, but you can easily access it. So I hope it's still sharing that. Actually, I don't think it's doing that. It's doing it. Oh no, it is. Okay, cool. So let me put this over here. Just because I am following along with my textbook. So first, you have your preconscious, and that one, again, you can access, but it just takes a little bit of thought to it. So you might not be able to think of right now what you had for dinner last week on Tuesday, but I bet if you really think about it, you will be able to. So that's your preconscious. And then your unconscious, well, that's the one that you're like, oh, these are the emotions, the thoughts, the memories, the drives that are influencing your behavior without current awareness. And they're hidden or unforgotten or forgotten experiences. So Freud's concept of the unconscious was a radically new idea at the time. It's thought to be one of his greatest contributions to the psychological thought. And critics, however, emphasize that the unconscious cannot be verified scientifically. This is what we call a topographical model, and here's where he pieces it together. So, along with the topographical model and your areas of consciousness and awareness, he also came up with these three terms called your id, ego, and your superego. So, these are really important because these are what he says determine your personality. So, your id, this one is your life instinct, your libido. This is what I consider the little devil on your shoulder. It's driven by sexual impulses, things that you just want, pleasure. So the id is present at birth and represents biological instinctual components that cannot bear tension. The id functions under the pleasure principle and therefore it demands immediate gratification. The avoidance or diminishing of pain, and securing the pleasure. The id is not radical or logical and has no concept of time, and it's a part of your unconscious mind, hence why it's underneath the water. It's underneath the water. Unconscious psychic energy, your libido is what we call your life instincts, and your Thanatos is your death instincts. And I think of Thanatos as Thanos from Marvel and how he went in and killed a bunch of people. So death, that's how I associate it. But it's also a Greek word, I believe. And that's where that word comes from. Recall correctly. Um, so yeah, then you have your superego. So your superego, this one internalizes your ideals. This is your morals. This is the good guy, the angel on your shoulder, per se. So with your superego, I lost it again. It represents the social component. It's made up of the conscious and the ego ideals. It is from the superego that the person pursues perfection. Guilty feelings result from the violation of standards and morals set by this superego. And it's still internalized, so it's still under the water. And then lastly, we have, so we already talked about the id, the little devil on your shoulder. We talked about the superego, the little angel on your shoulder. And then you have you, the ego in the middle. So you are the ego. This develops as a psychological component that wields power over the id. The ego functions under the reality principle and therefore logically and realistically plans appropriate ways to fulfill your needs. The ego is pressed by the id to give in to pleasure and gratification despite the consequences, and it operates primarily in the conscious and preconscious minds that we just talked about. So that's the topographical model we talked about. Now let's go ahead and talk about the development of growth. So his stages of psychosocial development. Actually, let me click on this guy. I should have had this out. Why didn't I? I don't know. It's okay. You guys can see this now. So the therapeutic goals of psychoanalysis are to make your unconscious conscious. We also want to gain insight into these unresolved problems. Some of the techniques that are used are free association, so saying whatever comes to mind, dream analysis, interpreting symbolic meanings, manifest versus latent content. Though, if you're studying to be a counselor, which I am, I was recently told that we cannot do like any TAT, thematic appreciation test, which isn't from him, but very similar to dream analysis because there's a lot of room for misinterpretation. So I would steer away from it if you're studying to be a counselor. I think she said that it, because this was from one of my colleagues, she said that it was against our ethical principles. So just be aware. Transference, this is the client projecting their feelings onto the therapist. Countertransference is the therapist projecting their feelings onto the client. Interpretation of their unconscious meaning through their thoughts or behaviors. I remember that Freud once said that there was no such thing as accidents. So, like, if you were to spill a glass of water on somebody and you were to be like, oh, that was a complete accident, Freud would argue that subconsciously you actually wanted to spill the water on that other person for whatever reasons. Resistance, the client avoids to talk about a person or a topic, and that's usually a sign of an unresolved conflict. His concepts of his core assumptions. Humans are driven by instincts and unconscious motives. I keep saying that word wrong, but it's okay. Early childhood experiences shape your personality. So with Freudians, you're going to be talking a lot about your childhood, what happened in your childhood, your relationship with your family, with your parents, and that kind of thing. With other theories, they focus more on the present, not so much the past. So psychoanalytic, always remember, is a lengthier therapy. It will not take 8 to 10 sessions. It will probably take like 15 to 20. If at that, if at that, your inner conflict between biological drives and societal rules, and it has a deterministic view, meaning that you have little emphasis on free will, whereas other theories do not have that and believe that you can change your life at any point. Freud believes that your childhood will ultimately determine your personality. Some other things, NCE tips, are focus on the id, ego, superego, defense mechanisms, and psychosexual stages, which we're about to talk about. Know how unconscious processes affect your behavior. Understand Freudian therapy techniques like free association and dream analysis. Be aware of transference and countertransference. Be able to critique Freud's work from a modern counseling perspective. Some of his criticisms involve it being unscientific, hard to empirically test, overemphasis on sexuality on childhood, biased samples. So it was based on wealthy Vietnamese patients. That's who he would see. And the gender bias, so the penis envy. His legacy in counseling, however, you still hear his name today. Freud was from a really long time ago. He influenced psychodynamic and object relations theories, which are other theories that we'll talk about later. He introduced talk therapy as a legitimate form of treatment, not just locking people up in insane asylums. And many modern therapeutic approaches evolved from his foundational concepts. So now let's look at growth. This one's prettier. Okay. So let's talk about the stages. Starting with our first stage. This is the oral stage. So the way that these work are very similar to Erickson's. You have to move on from one stage to the next in order for it to consider itself resolved. So, and let me just make sure I'm not blocking anything. I kind of am. I can't move myself anymore. That's okay. Okay. So in our oral stage, this is where all of these stages are driven by this word called cathexis. And this is a process by which sources of energy are tied to your thoughts, actions, behaviors, objects, or people. And what he said was if you were not able to move from one stage to the next, you would have what we call fixation. So fixation is the resistance of the person to move on from one stage to the next because the cathexis is too intense. So this can either be too intense in a good way, like they derive a lot of pleasure from it, or in a bad way, like they were traumatized or had too much pain from it. Cognitive and physical development does occur. So just because you're stuck in the oral stage doesn't mean you stop growing. However, you will emotionally stay stuck in that, and that will result in a fixation, which we'll talk about what they are. Fixation during a stage leads to certain problems as adults. I see how about that. It's right there. So in our first stage, we get gratification from sucking and tasting. So this is oral stage, birth to 1 year old, erogenous zone. I've seen people, like questions that I've seen on it are if the person can't stop eating and they don't know why, and you're a Freudian therapist, what stage would they be stuck in? And that would be their oral stage. So problems or fixations at this stage lead to addiction, to smoking or eating, or oral fixations. And I had also, this is another pretty picture. Zooming in on a Mac is so hard. Okay. You have smoking as an oral fixation, gum chewing, nail biting. These are all oral. Next, we have the anal stage. So this one's also similar to Erickson. And I keep bringing up Erickson because I want to do like compare and contrast of all the theorists. Erickson was actually Sigmund Freud's daughter, Anna Freud's student, and he broke off from them and created his own theory, of course. But in his stages, this is the autonomy versus shame and doubt. So in this stage, they're also potty training. And Erickson would propose that if they were to get stuck in that one, they would experience shame and doubt, and then that would in turn make them have that personality. Here in the anal stage, 1 to 3 years old, the erogenous zone is the bowel and bladder control. So they're focusing on controlling their bowels and bladder, aka toilet training. The ages are 1 to 3, 2 to 3 in this textbook. Let me see what they are in this textbook. It's because I have so many textbooks that I'm studying from. So the primary source of gratification is 1 to 3 as well. Is the anus and buttocks area. Pleasure is attained through retention and expulsion of feces and urine. How parents handle toilet training will influence future personality development. Fixation produces retentiveness, also known as stinginess, obsessive thinking, compulsive behavior, cleanliness, and orderliness, or expulsiveness, which is messiness, destructiveness, and cruelty. So you could be one or the other, retentive or expulsive. And when I think of like anal fixation, I think of like that person's really anal. So they're very strict. They stick to their thing. Next, we have the phallic stage. So the phallic stage, here's where they start to explore their body and they figure out, I've got things in between my legs and what happens when I touch them. So in this stage, the person will, this is from 3 to 5 years old, their primary source of gratification is their genitals. So pleasure is derived from manipulation of their genitals through touching, folding, masturbation. And in this stage, the Oedipus complex, which is the desire of a male child to eliminate the father, to take the central position in that mother's life, and the Electra complex, which is the desire of the female child to eliminate the mother to take central position in that father's life, emerge. So this is also the stage where the child like falls in love with the opposite sex parent. And this is again one of the most controversial stages. And the way that it's resolved is through identification with the same sex parent. Another thing that happens is penis envy, so that the daughter has penis envy because she doesn't have a penis and the dad does. And here is also where you develop your superego. So your oral stage, that's where you're born with your ego, who you are. But in your phallic stage, if you're touching yourself and your parents are like, hey, that's wrong, don't be doing that. Well, then the little angel pops up on your shoulder, your superego, and is like, you can't do that. You got to stop. So that's your phallic stage. And then fixation of this one involves vanity, envy, passivity, confusionness of identity. It also can involve sexual exploitation of others. And yeah, so that's your phallic stage. Then we move on to the latent stage. So in the latent stage, this is 6 to puberty. Another thing that I've noticed with like Freud and all the other theorists versus Erikson is, because I've seen this as a question, which theorist gave an entire life's worth of stages, right? And the only one that did that was Erikson, because here we move on from like the genital is 12 and on, and that's it. Whereas Erikson has every single age group until you die. So your latent stage is from 6 to 11 years old. And here's where your sexual desires become dormant. So the individual focuses on mastering their social skills, their personal awareness, their ego refinement, and the child learns how to relieve anxiety through use of defense mechanisms, which we'll talk about in a second. They also start to identify with their same sex, so they spend a lot of time with children that are the same sex. And so at this age, you might see like kids in a playground, like, I'm only going to play with the girls, I'm only going to play with the guys. So that's your latent stage. Again, this is very critical for your social skills and confidence, peer relationship and roles. Yeah. I said all that. Okay. Next, we're going to move on to the genital stage. So in the genital stage, this is your adolescence and on. Puberty causes a reemergence of your sexual impulses, and individuals show interest in sex and emergence of the capability of real love. There's a potential reemergence of the Oedipus and the Electra complex, but successful development leads to sublimation of parental love and identification with non-parental primary objects, sexual maturity, marriage, and child rearing. And those are the stages of psychosexual development by Sigmund Freud. Got that in there. We talked about that. We talked about these. Freud stages are useful in understanding the root of adult behavior or neurosis. They emphasize the importance of early childhood experience. They are thought largely considered outdated in modern developmental psychology. The criticisms we already went through. Okay, so let's talk about defense mechanisms really quick. Now, I already have a video on defense mechanisms that goes into grave detail, so I'm just going to do a quick little recap of what they can be. Now, defense mechanisms are not only a Freudian term, they are used outside of Freud as well. And these are the following. Yay, so exciting. I actually really like defense mechanisms. Let me just bust them out over here. This is a really good book, the National Counseling Exam Study Manual. Again, I have like 6 books that I'm using. Shall we start with displacement? So I'm going to do them in the order that I have over here. So displacement, you are displacing your emotions to another person, another place, another thing. If your boss yells at you at work and you can't yell back, you could go and displace those emotions to your dog when you get home. How dare you freaking poop on the floor? You're a horrible dog. Let me drink some coffee real quick. Okay. Next, we have rationalization. You're justifying something with a logical excuse. I didn't study because I needed to relax. Justifying your behavior. It's not lying, it's a matter of habit and intensity. A student will explain they're failing their exam by, I just didn't see why I needed to take the course. You're justifying a behavior. So that's rationalization. Then we have compensation. You don't feel good about one thing, so you try to excel in another. So excelling in another to mask other flaws. A struggling student becomes a star athlete, or a woman who cannot bear children becomes overly attached to her pets. Projection. You are projecting your own thoughts and feelings to others. A jealous partner accuses the other of being unfaithful, or feeling like a coward in handling a situation, but blaming the outcome on the cowardness of another person. Reaction formation. I think you're reacting the opposite way you're supposed to. So acting opposite to true feelings, someone secretly likes a person, but they act cold and rude to them. People who are zealots about smut, but have really hidden desires. That's what the book says. Denial. So refusing to accept reality because it's too distressing. Failing to refuse or acknowledge or recognize reality because of strong inner needs. So ignoring the symptoms of a heart attack, wearing copper bracelets, or a person with a drinking problem insisting that they're fine. Then we have repression. So this one is an unconscious one, and it's, again, what do we focus on when we're talking about Freud? The unconscious. So he says that this is one of the most important ones. This one, and there was another one that I can't think of at the moment, but when we get to it, I'll probably like, oh yeah, this was the most important one. Okay, so in repression, they're unconsciously blocking painful memories or thoughts. This is the most basic defense mechanism according to Freud. Now, suppression, not to be confused with repression. Suppression, you are consciously choosing to ignore the distressing thoughts. So I'll deal with my breakup after finals. So repression, you don't want to, it just happens. Suppression, you do want to, you're choosing to. Then we have identification. So identification, do I have her on here? Yes. Taking on the traits of someone else. A child copies their favorite teacher to feel confident. And they do this to overcome their feelings of inferiority. So, yeah. Okay, are those the only ones that were on here? Other ones that are on here. Sublimation, substituting. So I think sublimation, they're substituting one behavior with another. So channeling unacceptable impulses into positive outlets. So an aggressive teen taking up boxing or football. Regression is reverting back to childlike behaviors under stress. An adult throws a tantrum after losing a game. We did displacement, we did projection, we did denial, we did repression, suppression, introjection, inserting another person's beliefs as your own. This happens a lot with parents and children. You might not want to be, if we're bringing in politics, you might not want to be a Republican, but if you were raised that way, and that's probably you'll take in that thing. Isolation of affect, so separating your thoughts from your emotions, talking about trauma with no emotion at all. And these were expanded. Some of these were like originally Freud's, but Anna Freud, his daughter, also added more. Fantasy, escaping into imagination to avoid reality, so daydreaming about success instead of working on it. Undoing, trying to erase bad behavior through good action. So after yelling at a person, they offer that person a gift. And then we did, and intellectualization, focusing on facts to avoid feelings. So after a breakup, only one talks about the attachment that they had, and they don't kind of have the feelings about it. So they'll be like, oh, that relationship was not for me anyway, because I want to go do something different with my life. Let's do some practice questions. So, according to Freud, fixation at the oral stage may result in what kind of behavior? So remember we said oral, anything having to do with the mouth. So which one of these has to do with the mouth? Sexual urges does not have to do with your mouth. Difficulty with authority also doesn't have to do with the mouth. Neatness doesn't have to do with the mouth. But smoking and nail biting does. Now, neatness, remember I said that person's very anal, so that would be anal fixation. Sexual urges, where does that come in? Your phallic stage. And then difficulty with authority, I don't think that's one of the stages. I could be wrong. Which of the following best describes the phallic stage of psychosocial development? So phallic has to do with your genitals. So which one of these has to do with your genitals? Focusing on your bowel control. Which one was the one that had to do with bowel? The anal. Genital maturation and interest in others. Are you mature when you're in your phallic stage, or are you a child? You're a child, so you're not mature yet. Discovering gender identity and the Oedipus complex. What stage are you in love with the opposite sex? Little check mark here. Period of repressed sexual urges. Where are they repressed? When they're latent. So this one was C. What is the correct order of Freud's psychosexual stages? So in this one, we have two mnemonics that we can use. Orphan Annie is a pretty little girl, and old ASS people love gold. So Orphan Annie is a pretty little, nope. Orphan, nope. Orphan Annie is a pretty little girl. C is the answer here. The latency stage is characterized by what? So strong sexual interest in peers. Remember, your urges are latent. They're not there. So no. A focus on intellectual, social, and skill development. If you're not thinking about sex, can you think about all this? Yeah. So perhaps pleasure from the bowel movements. Bowel has to do with your anus, anal. So it's not C. Fear of losing parental love, Oedipus complex and that stuff. not there. So the answer for this one is B. A person unconsciously blocks out traumatic memories from their childhood. This is an example of what? So we could eliminate and keep two of which have to do with suppressing memories, right? So the two that have to do with suppressing memories are repression and suppression. Denial is you're straight up denying that it ever happened. Projection is you're projecting your feelings onto someone else. Now, remember, I said one of these was conscious and the other one was subconscious. I wish that they had made this one the subconscious one because I could have associated the S with the S, but it's not, it's the opposite. So, repression, you're doing it, you're not doing it on purpose, that's unconscious, and suppression, you are suppressing those feelings, pushing them down. So, the answer for this one is B because you're unconsciously blocking them out. Next, we have a woman yells at her child after having a fight with her boss. What defense mechanism is she using? So she can't fight her boss. She can't yell back at her boss, right? So she is putting all that anger onto someone else. So she's displacing it from her child here, from her boss. She wants to yell at her boss, but she can't yell at her boss. So she's going to put it onto someone else, aka her child. That's also known as displacement. Reaction formation is acting in the opposite way. Regression is doing something from an earlier stage. So, like you're scared, you start sucking your thumb or something. Undoing is trying to undo something that you did. Like you were mean to someone and you wanted to make it better. So you bought them a present. Then we have a teenager who is angry at his parents, channels that energy into running track competitively. This is what? So you're channeling energy into something else. You're substituting an angry behavior into something that is running track, something that's good, socially acceptable. Substituting, sublimation. Just to go over the other ones, denial, you're denying that it ever happened. Rationalization, you're trying to give an excuse as to how it was okay. And projection, we just talked about, you are projecting your feelings onto someone else. Which defense mechanism involves refusing to acknowledge an unpleasant reality? Refusing to acknowledge it, you're denying it. You're straight up denying it because you don't like it. Intellectualization, you're trying to outsmart the system, like, oh, that wasn't meant to happen because of whatever reason. Compensation, you don't feel confident in one stage, so you make up for it in something else. Introjection, you're getting another person's beliefs and introjecting them into your life. A man loudly condemns cheating while he is being secretly unfaithful. Not only is he a hypocrite, but he is also reacting the opposite way that he's supposed to be. So this is A, projections, projecting your feelings onto something else. Rationalization, that would be like rationalizing the cheating. And repression is unconsciously repressing that information. A college student who just failed an exam says it wasn't that important anyway. So they are rationalizing why them failing was okay. Which defense mechanism involves adopting characteristics of someone else to feel more secure? So this one's a little tricky because you have two that it could possibly be. You have your introjection and your identification. So with introjection, you are taking that person's beliefs and making them your own, right? Here, it says you're adopting characteristics to feel more secure. With identification, you're identifying yourself as that person to take over their characteristics because you don't feel secure about yourself. So that's the one we talked about with like the kid and the teacher. So in this one, because that person keyword is that they feel insecure, where did it go? It is identification. A child begins sucking on their finger again after the birth of a sibling. They are regressing. They're going back in time. They didn't suck their fingers anymore, and now they are. When someone deals with a painful breakup by obsessively reading academic articles on grief, they are doing what? They're trying to logically learn more, aka intellectualize why the breakup was okay. And then we have, gotta hide the answer key. A person makes a rude comment and then gives that person a gift. They are trying to undo the rudeness that they just did. Stop it. Stop it. I keep scrolling down and it's not good because the answers are down here. Which of the following is a conscious defense mechanism? So this one you know you're doing. Again, repression. You are not aware that you're doing it. Regression, reverting back to behavior. I don't think that child wants to start sucking their thumb again. Fantasy, you're thinking, you're daydreaming. When I daydream, it's not on purpose. And suppression is the only one that you're consciously pushing down those memories because you don't want to deal with them. That's suppression. And that's it. So C, B, B, C. I don't know why I'm doing that. I know what the answers are. I made the quiz. Okay, stop sharing. Um, I don't know how to stop sharing right now. Pause. No. Okay. Anyway, stop share. There it is. Okay. Cool beans. So that was a very long video on Freud and everything that his theory entails. I think I went through everything. Yeah, it looks like it. So I hope you learned something and let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Have a wonderful day.